So, finally figured it out. There was a lot of bugs, there's a lot of frustration. 5 hours of debugging. Finally did it. No documentation. I absolutely hate this. Anyway, so what we want is we want the table to show up. Now, the table essentially builds itself in that there is very little that we actually have to do besides getting the information and then passing along the information to the program or to Awesome Tables, and that will essentially build the table entirely for us. It does an incredible amount, and it's kind of shocking. With that being said, however, it's very picky with its naming. In addition, as you can see right here, it doesn't want to show up. We'll fix that in a minute, and I'll show you why it's working like that. However, first off, to go over the first thing that you want to do, you'll want to make your page like normal. So right here we have the classroom, and you'll go over here, you'll do add component. Honestly, I've just been sticking with what we've already had of a, I believe it was like a Razor page, which is empty, which creates our baseline. Now with that baseline being created, what we can then move on to is the actual content. Sort of. We have our page, and now we need our controller. The controller does work with the page, even though it's not an MVC controller. As you can see in here, we don't have anything in this page whatsoever. We do, however, have a lot of stuff in here. But if you notice, we don't have any get index, or like an index page. That's because this controller does not handle displaying the page whatsoever. It only handles passing in information. So we have our function right here of we want to get all the listed classrooms and display them. For that, we'll set it as an iActionResult, which essentially just means that we want to send out information. Then we'll get the class, get all the classrooms, and pair it with the building. We'll go over here, and this is kind of where the heart of everything lies. This grid model builder needs to be the type of what data you're sending. So if, for instance, you're sending like a student, or if you're sending student preferences, or if you're sending pretty much anything, it has to be of this type. I'm not 100% certain how this would go with a view model builder, as the view model builder might have to go into like the actual page, as this only sends information the table is going to be using, nothing else whatsoever. You also notice that we have this grid parameters G, which is passed in through here. This is handled by Awesome. We do not really tinker with this whatsoever, at least as far as I know. You probably can. The more advanced we get to, maybe, not at all. The second parameter, or rather the first one, is our classrooms set as a queryable. This will allow us to, this is essentially what's required for the grid builder to take in the parameter. It needs an iQueryable of type classroom. Moving on, we have this key property. This key property is pretty much just the key of whatever we're using. For instance, in this example, we're using a classroom, so it's going to be of type classroom. It is also it's a lambda expression. So, with that being said, you can use almost anything that you would like in this case, but the simplest is just setting it to O has the lambda of O.classroom. And this O right here is the type right here. So that will be what everything is based on. So you'll do like O, and then you'll have to base it off of whatever you're finding in this class, which is why we have classroom ID. Now for this mapped model. Technically, we don't need this because it's not being displayed. At least as far as I know. I would still include it simply, well, this might require a little bit more experimentation, but I don't believe this is entirely needed because it's not being used by the table itself. However, what you have is you have the room number, you have the building name is equal to name. This is very important if you want to pull from a nested class, such as when we go to classroom, you see that we have this building class right here. And that's what we did right here, is we attached the two. And you'll see in building that we have the building name string. Well, we need to assign it to a singular word, pretty much. If we want to use this right here, the building name at all, we do need to assign it to a separate thing. Which means that if we go over here into the index, you'll see that it should, or at least it looks like it would, connect. However, it won't. Because essentially what happens is that it uses just this singular word, and it passes that in, and it looks for this inside of the map, and it's not able to find it, because building in a classroom is actually a function, so it's not able to see it at all. Meaning we need to reassign building name to a different name, essentially. And that's where the dot parentheses name comes in. This looks for this, the name. So far, this is the only way to actually call nested classes. In addition, if we didn't have a nested class to use, we could simply not have this at all. As you can see that the mappings already are incredibly close to our original class. In class, we have classroom ID, we have room number, and we have capacity. So the only reason that you would need to make this new mapping is if you're using a nested class. If you're not using a nested class, don't remap anything. You're fine sending it as is. If you do remap, don't send. If you do use a nested class, then you will have to remap. Otherwise, you will not have access to displaying the data. Lastly, and probably the most importantly, is you'll want to do your grid model, and then you'll want to do build, pass that into the JSON function. I have it as just assigning to another thing because I was debugging, but in all reality, you very much could just do this. I wouldn't highly recommend it, as it is sometimes useful to see what data is being passed through. However, it is not required. So you can leave it like this, or you can take this right here and just put it down and they return immediately. This bind right here is incredibly important, as this binds it to the table. You cannot simply just throw in the dot name. That does not bind it directly to the class. Because essentially right here, this is a mapping. It pulls information from the original class and essentially says how to display it. It overrides the previous mapping that this provided. Well, it still has the original class, meaning you still need to bind it using your original pathway. In this instance, you essentially have something like your original model, which is your classroom. You have your original model, which is your classroom, and that is where you're starting off of from everything. So this right here, this classroom dot is just, it's automatically assumed in front of all these bindings. Then you'll have like room number, which is how you bind to a classroom dot room number. You'll then also have things like, if you want to bind to your classroom dot building, you'll give it the pathway that you would normally give it in a C# program. So it'd be classroom.building.building name. Keep all of the capitalization the same. And that's, for the most part, some of the most important details about the controller and this. Now, another thing is I had to get rid of the pattern, which is the area over, where I had the area override. Essentially, it looked like this. Area equals customer. I think that that simply was something that was pulled over from whoever copied it. Mainly because I don't know what the customer actually is. I don't think we actually have one. So I got rid of that. And that fixed quite a few of our problems. Lastly, displaying the columns, yes, the columns, and that's how that was how the columns link with the controller. However, you might see that there's additional things, like these 4 lines right here. This right here starts your grid. This function right here gives your grid a name. This mod lambda expression essentially says that use the default grid. Without this, it won't have certain functions that are kind of just automatically displayed in it. I use it just because it makes it look more pretty. We don't need to use it, but it is a single line of code, and it makes it look 10 times better. So, use it, don't use it, it will not make or break your thing. This height right here displays how large of a table you'll have. I want to say it's in like pixel sizes. I have no idea. Just make it whatever size you want. I do 350 because that's what was in the demo. This right here is one of the most important parts of this grid builder. This line of .url, that is how it links up with the controller. And you'll see .url, and what that .url is expecting is a string. Essentially a string to a web page or to a GET request. The way that I handle this was url.action, which is just a simple thing that we have available to us. And because I don't want to deal with naming, and because I don't want to deal with if my thing gets renamed and it will cause bugs later on in the future, there's this nifty thing called name of in C#, where essentially you're able to pass in a function, pretty much anything you want, and it'll get the name of that thing, which in this case, the name it'll return is get classrooms, which is exactly the name of this. And that's what we want. So this is more of a safety precaution for myself in case I rename things in the future. The classroom automatically appends the controller to the end of that because it is looking for a controller, and we're simply telling it what type of controller it's looking for. Now, since we are already signed in as a program coordinator, we pretty much only had access to the things inside of the program coordinator area. I'm not sure if this will mess with things in the future. It's not broke, don't fix it. But you'll essentially place your controller underneath right here. What we could very much do is no, never mind. So just place your controller right there, have it get you the data, and that's pretty much all that you need to know. And to prove that you actually do need this client format, in order for it to work, we shall relaunch the page and show you exactly what it is. Alright, so as you'll see, we go over to the rooms, we have the building, and that's how it's displayed. You might wonder, like, oh, I really don't want room num to show up. Well, that's very easy to fix, because in our columns, we have this thing called a header. And essentially the header, what that'll do is it'll rename the top of our thing to whatever we want. Alright, and now as you can see, our header has been renamed to room number. It functions just as well as pretty much anything. This is a basic table. Getting in filters is very simple. If you need help with that, please message me. I have been losing my mind over getting this working for the past 5 hours, so I just wanted to get this out. But this main, that o.main, that's what is provided right here, where you have your page size, you have your number, you have your refresh, and you have this. Alright. I hope that makes everything a lot simpler. It's very little typing for a lot of stuff that's available to us. It's very easy. I'm probably going to retroactively modify a lot of our different tables in order to implement this with how simple it was. On the other hand, actually having the table be modifiable, there's, like I said, this is just simply for displaying information. I'll figure out how to modify the tables later. Alright. Thank you for watching, and hopefully that helped.